Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Can you guys see here? Okay. Hello, hello. Hey, my name is Becky, and I currently am the CEO and founder of Dragonbow, which is a platform enable leadership collaboration, connecting strategy, OKRs, and execution in one central place, and also connected it with the tools that teams are using. And professionally, I'm very interested and have been in transformation, product development, building product, scaling company throughout my career. So when I met Amber, who happens to be one of our customers, and we had a lot of interesting conversations around transforming organizations and how challenges people gone through, and how should we think about this concept in a broader context and more than just a traditional version. That's how we sparked this conversation. So with some of the context, I want to just kick it off, and everyone feel free to joining as a conversation. And this is not going to be the first one. Will be one, not be the only one. Will be just one of the many conversations we're going through, because transformation is something that happens continuously to meet the demand of today's time. So with that, I would just do a quick intro of Amber. Then we can get started. Yeah. So Amber has been in the trenches of IT since 1998. In roles from system design, network engineering, BPR, business analyst for web applications, and she's also an early adopter and coach of Lean UX thinking and usability prototyping in organizations. She started in web project management in 2008 and saw the value of Agile, and with some high stakes successes in designing, delivering complex CMS solutions. So in the past 10 years, she's focused on building and scaling Agile teams and organizations, as well as using her boundless energy and a sense of humor to advocate for fearless change in organizations to redesign and transformation. So Amber's a specialist in Agile practice coaching, process hybridization, and is deeply in tune with what drives excellence at every step of the PDLC, from strategy to implementation, deployment, and beyond. So with that, she will be sharing her success stories, learnings, and some of the challenges that could turn out Agile transformation into a smoking crater. So our whole topic is around Agile, around transformation, around how we lead organizations to success. So without further ado, up to you, Amber. You want to add any comment and thoughts before we start it? Wait, you're on mute.
Amber, you're mute.
The mute thing wasn't actually on the thing, so thank you very much for that one. I just wanted to say, like, the most wonderful thing about the way that we started talking, Becky, and yes, we engaged initially around trying to find a solution to really provide a link between strategy and execution. And this is where my meeting with Becky was so enlightening, when I realized we had so many similar touch points and so many similar stories to tell about what made for good strategy development, and how to take that strategy and turn that into really nice visible product development. And I'm just really excited to be talking about this tonight. So let's kick it off. Let's just start.
All right. So now, one of the things that I heard a lot is how does it even get started? When a company come to you, mm-hmm. and what kind of problems they try to solve?
There's a raft of them. And I think one of the biggest ones that I see, because my main focus has been software and development. So app development, software development teams, large apps, large products, and they are either in the process of having transformed, but don't know that they need to continue the adaptation process, and they're starting to come up with issues. And I think that one of the biggest ones, the biggest kind of areas that I've seen on are teams not being able to deliver on time, or teams having the perception of not enough productivity to satisfy the requirements of the organization for delivery. Low quality is also something. So when teams are finding that they're spending more time on trying to fix bugs than understanding what they could do to really delight customers and make products which are easy to maintain, easy to add code to, easy to release. Another big one, and I think that this is a really pertinent one for the organizations in scale up phases. So when they're going from maybe kind of 50 people to 150, 200, 400, 600 and beyond, is how do you change or design a strategy at an organizational level? So you've got your company vision, your company mission. How do you turn that into strategy that can then be translated and broken down into executable work within the teams? And I think that there are these kind of key questions which are in the back of everybody's heads.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
So it's so interesting that you said that, because I think the word transformation has transformed itself, if you will. 16 years ago, when I was leading transformation at PayPal, we were talking about Agile transformation, and we just think about, changing from a waterfall to Agile. We weren't really thinking about the one thing you brought up is a very, very interesting, is to how organizations should think about defining strategy, defining the organization as they scale to bigger size. That means it's always happening, right? It's always happening. The company grow bigger, the company change in the operating world that it's going on right now, like we are in now. They're going through transformation.
Yeah.
Oh wow. So how do they think about that? Like, is it transformation now? If it happens all the time, is it incremental? Is it like tear everything out? You are going to just gonna build something new? How should they think about it? That if you have a story, that would be awesome to share.
Well, I've got a couple of success stories, but these ones were at the very beginning of my journey into really understanding and being able to execute Agile. But I think one of the biggest things that's really overlooked when considering any kind of pilot into, we're talking about an Agile transformation in this instance, but this would also be an OKR, like a transformation from an organization trying to implement OKRs. There are still some really fundamental questions to ask about how you go about doing that. And I think that there is a lot of flying by the seat of the pants that happens that can really impact an organization's ability to be successful on this. And this is a pattern that I've seen starting before we have enough to really understand what the pitfalls are, is the same pattern I've seen in releasing a feature, to designing initiatives, to understanding what business you're going into, to starting up a new business. It's understanding what problems we're trying to solve and doing that work beforehand, which has been the most powerful thing. And I think, and I'm just going to refer back to my notes here, because I have a couple of notes on the sort of questions to ask in this regard. Where have they gone? Here we go. So like the four main questions that I like to ask before any kind of project. It doesn't really matter if I'm doing a Greenfields Agile adoption, or if we're starting on any kind of new thinking, is like, why are we doing the thing that we're doing? So why are we wanting to transform with Agile? Why are we going to try and run this as a pilot, or run this as a small thing? Are we going to try a bottom up, or are we going to try a top down approach? What sort of people and resources do we really need to have on board in order to make sure that this effort is successful? And also I think the most important one is like, what does the future look like? And I know if I could, I know Stefan and I have talked about this a few times. An exercise that I really, really love to do with people and teams is Remember the Future. This is a game by Luke Homan. There's a wonderful book that he's done called Innovation Games. So I'm going to add that to the resource list later.
That would be awesome. Thank you so much.
But Remember the Future is an ability for the team to step into a positive state. And it doesn't matter what kind of team we're talking about here. It could be a software development team. It could be a team of executives that have a large scale transformation to plan across any kind of any kind of industry, but they still have to go through the same exercise. What are we actually trying to achieve? What does success look like in the future? Because if we can't define what success looks like, it makes it very difficult to start making measurements against this. And these kind of key questions, I think, are what get largely brushed over, or should we say, not quite given the time and effort that they require in order to answer them sufficiently and be able to create the environment for really fundamental change to happen. And you just have to give me 1 second, Becky, if you could go with the next question. I've been booted out of our document, so all of my talking notes have technology.
Yeah, so it's actually interesting. I want to just, if you have an example, I think you're so right. Now brought up a lot of memories of the, when we're trying to kick off a transformation effort or some area that we believe that we need to change. It is, getting people to talk about the why and why we need to change and who's going to impact it and resources was a difficult conversation, but it was a relatively easy compared to the future. I think it's a very interesting to talk about the future where we had a hard time to get people aligned on future. Either it will be so visionary that you can get there at the end of the transformation, or people just cannot figure out what it's going to be after we do the go through the plan and did what we did, what it could look like. So share with us a little bit, when you talk about the future, what is the start of the future, and is it the one vision of the future, or how does it look like? It would be awesome to hear.
It has, this technique I think is really good because it kind of puts you into the place where you are thinking about a lot of different facets of what success looks like. So it could be, for example, let me just do this. If you're a team looking to transform, maybe to using a different framework, so say this is Scrum, this is something that I've done quite a few times. What does it feel like now that you're in this team? What did the incentives that you thought existed pay off for you? Have you got greater transparency? Are you delivering work faster? What are other people saying about your successes? How successful have you been? And get them to dream really, really big at this stage. Mm-hmm. Maybe they've kicked off a new open source product, which has started winning awards in the industry, for example. And it
right.
really, it creates this kind of feeling of positivity and success. And I think as a starting exercise, like in the kickoff workshops that I've done specifically around changing tact and reanalyzing and reassessing kind of what teams need and kicking them off, this has been a really powerful thing to allow better ideas to flow later on, because you can leverage off this from the very, very start. How does this action that we're doing now help you get to this desired outcome that you've got in the future? And I think that largely it is emotive, it is perceptive. So it's team self-perception as well as external perception. And it's also got a real element of trying to empathize and get people into a feeling of pride for what they've achieved. And I think, this is a fascinating kind of subpoint that I'd like to get back to at some stage, because I think this is a really interesting one.
It is actually very interesting. If you don't mind, instead of with the question, some of the challenges that we have experiences that you highlight a couple of things are very, very crucial. I think it's really cool. One is you talk about the feelings. And sometimes people think about the transformation, the outcome, they think more about this metrics, how many bugs, how fast you ship, and things like that, right? I'm not saying these are not important, but I think the human element of it seems to be overlooked quite often. So want to hear from you a little bit of how one is on the team side, that motivate teams, have the feeling side of things in addition to hard metrics, and then also talk about the executive side. Quite often you happen is in an organization that executives think and want something that's different from the team. How do you make the connection of that so that it's actually everyone's moving in the
Well,
same.
this, I think that this really touches on one of the other things that is an indicator, or one of the things that people want to try and fix when they're doing these transformations, is culture and environment. And I think that this is kind of key if we look at the problems that, say, for example, being in a low collaboration, low trust environment can really do. How do you create success and flow and responsibility and accountability and mastery and these wonderful things inside the team, but on the other side, the layers of communication and execution layers have got a lack of trust, lack of accountability, that they have maybe broken a dysfunctional communication. And I mean, I'm not talking about any one company in particular at all here. This is something that I think is prevalent across industry and across IT, definitely, is that we want to try and use something to fix a problem in the environment, and we want to change the teams without looking at where the environment's being created and kind of perpetuated from. So, right. And there was I heard a really nice saying the other day, like if you're having problem with growing a flower, you don't try and fix the flower.
That's right.
Around the outside. So
right.
What's going on with the roots? Maybe the soil is stuck. Am I giving it enough water? Right. Got enough air? Is there enough sunlight? Right? We look at these external factors to understand why there is a blockage for success. And I think that one of the key kind of rationales from wanting to change from this, it's companies expecting teams as output mechanisms instead of outcome mechanisms. So they're achieving output, and output you can crush people to get more output, but if you start engaging them with outcomes, then it's more successful. Outcomes need a specific environment to be able to exist in. It takes change from lots of different levels, and this is in transformation of how people think about strategy, how we translate strategy down into the teams, how we look at our products, and what we look at as success as well.
Right. It's actually very interesting. I'm going to put something. So this is not a note that we had before, but I'm going to put it in here anyway. In some ways, the agile thinking versus the agile mechanism don't really line up very well. Mm-hmm. Being that, we measure the burn downs, the points, these are all outputs. And because they're immediate and more measurable, today, with more people working from home remotely, that there's even more of a somewhat of either pressure or needs, a lack of a trust and transparency for companies that started to install things that measure keystrokes, to measure screen active times. And this is definitely not something would truly drive business outcome.
Well, right? There's no real indication that stuff like that is actually meaning that you're getting, you're contributing to the success of your product or to your organization.
Right.
I mean, I could type things endlessly. It doesn't necessarily mean right. I'm the right thing.
Right. And that's totally the point. That's totally the point, right? You don't have people just sitting there and try to keep the session live to show they are, right? Or you don't have to record their screen every 30 seconds. Their companies get funded for millions of dollars for doing things like that. You can see that type of thinking still there. But I want to just pivot this angle a little bit and talk about how companies should think. And actually, if you have an example, would be awesome. The reason I believe is that it's a hard to measure outcome. You do something, it won't be instant, right? The instant gratification, it's the human instinct we want to go, but it's a very hard to measure that outcome by the product in the same or maybe immediate next period that you can find it. Do you have any learnings or stories that we can see how that could be done?
I do, and I think one of the things that is really important to consider, and this is we are now really touching on what happens when you have decided to start a change and you're looking at what factors are going to, whether or not you've got indicators of success already. And I think one of the things that is really important to consider inside this is that there are facets across team health, there's facets across behavior, there's facets across the way work is designed, there's facets across the planning cycles. There are entire there is a swath of information which is qualitative rather than quantitative, which is indicative of whether or not you're on the right track to succeed with your efforts and change. And I think one of the biggest things that I want to mention here is that people look at this as like an agile change, so it should be an agile coach, or this is a tech change, so that should be kind of in the hands of a technological leadership. I think one of the most important things that people kind of miss out on here is that it's organizational change management, regardless of what it is. And the facets of change management are the ones that need to be looked at. You know, how are we going to communicate this plan? Do we have the right resources in place? How do we support the people to give them what they need in order to make it the most successful that we can? What is our action plan to roll this out? Who are the champions? These sorts of things also need to be in place so that leadership can help guide that change and can help create that emotional, it is an emotional environment, but also create this environment and the culture that allows the change to continue its growth naturally, rather than kind of being stopped by something and then stopped by something else and then stopped by something else. And I think one of the biggest things that happens with agile change is that Agile in all its forms are fantastic in exposing problems with a low functioning or dysfunctional system, whether it's a work system, a software system, a communication system, a process that you're using. You will see very quickly where there are problems in it. Now, it's not Agile necessarily that's caused the problems, but it's exposing.
Right.
So this is a really interesting measure too, is I like to look at it as kind of the mean return times to live when you're fixing a bug, and the time it takes you from finding the bug to releasing a live fix back into deployment so that everything is good, is the speed to which you're uncovering impediments, what level of impediment they are, and how fast you're solving them. So that is a metric that you can use to see how fast your processes are improving in the background, and this is process control.
Right.
You mentioned something really interesting though. There is another kind of, let's say, paradox within Agile, which is, it says people and conversations and face-to-face talking, dynamic communication over negotiation, contracts, processes and tools. And yet we use a process and tools really heavily in order to inform where it is, where we're going here. How rigidly do you follow a process to ensure that you get the benefits from the left-hand side of the Agile Manifesto? And there's a lot to say about that's the balance between the cultural environment and the planning environment, the product environment, and how all of these parts fit together. How balanced that is.
Right. It's definitely true. I think the balance part is really important. The whole definition of Agile means you're not supposed to take in the definition of Agile exactly as a process. So that the spirit of that, it makes more sense. So it's interesting how that, this is something being around for over 20 years now, and having that adapt to how things work in a smaller organization, bigger organization, distributed teams versus in the same location. It makes sense to
absolutely.
go through that.
One of the things you mentioned before about the use of metrics as a proof point for productivity and motivation of your workforce, as more of a productivity and output measurement, as opposed to a measure of how good we feel about what it is that we're doing and how much change we're actually making. I think that there's also a good fine line to run here, which is we want that empirical data. We do want to measure stuff. We absolutely do want to measure stuff. And I think that the really important part here is, how do you use those measurements? Do you use them for good or do you use them for evil? Because if you use them as the whipping stick instead of the Zuckerbrot, so we've got the Zuckerbrot concept, it's far more effective to look at this as, this is interesting. What patterns can we gain from this? Where does this help us to see where we could continue to improve, rather than using it as this performance measure, you know, how much you've been here, how much you've contributed, your lines of code. I mean, if your star performer isn't writing lines of code, but contributing to scientific or strategic conversations at all levels of the business, this person is going to look like a failure on paper.
Right. It's actually a very good point. So could we, do you have some, maybe tell us one example that about the transformation that's done that affect, if it's in one team, it's great, but if you can have something around how transformation is a success story on maybe a couple of teams that looking at different roles that they work together, like you said, change management, the success and contribution of people could be in different roles. Would you have something to share?
I do. So one of the most fascinating exercises that I've been on, which looked at not just it was with a pilot team, so it was a pilot team transformation, but it also, we needed to do something very interesting here, in that we had a low trust on the executive layer, and this meant that we had to have some kind of contracted, effectively like a requirements document. So right. How do we, they want to, if we've got a waterfall delivery expectation, and yet we've got to try and produce the software that we're doing. We don't know exactly what it is that we're going to produce in a year. So we can't tell you right now with any kind of accuracy what that's going to be. But we can tell you that we think if we try this, we can move this metric. And then if we try this the next week, we can move this metric. The most fascinating thing about this is that it took an effort from the team to be able to start thinking down in modular chunks. So how do we do the smallest thing that we can do to show that something is successful? Not that a whole things are successful at one time, but just one thing that's useful. What's the most useful thing? On the other side, there was a very, very big, almost like mental modeling and reframing exercise that happened within the executive layer that needed to take place to take their thinking from, we want a thing and you're supposed to execute a thing, and here's your money to execute the thing, and you said you're going to give us all of these things, to what are the sort of returns on investment we're expecting from being able to have the strategy executed. And I think that this was a fascinating change for them, because they were being pushed to think about what would happen in competition. Would achieving this goal mean that they would have a better positioning in the market? If they did this, were they approaching an area in the market that was blue ocean as opposed to red ocean? You know, is there going to be like a nice clear swath where we can really make some innovative change here and be kind of front runners? What does this mean in terms of what we're expecting from our intangible business benefits to be? Are we expecting happier people engaged in using our company? Are we expecting to have faster turnaround times? What are the other factors that are at play here, and what does this mean for the business success? So we had to get them to describe the business success criteria in order to then take this and say, well, with this piece of software, we think we're going to be able to help you boost this metric and achieve this goal and this goal. And I think that this was still in a time where OKRs were definitely in existence. Probably there would have been in the first kind of 10 years of them, so only just kind of filtering out of the States. So nobody was really using them. This was in good old days back in New Zealand. And Tony played at the
one of the best performing country now.
Yes, exactly. Back in New Zealand, we were definitely trying out Agile, but how do you do Agile strategy? So how do you do iterative and adaptive strategy, and what do you need to change in the mindset in order to design that effectively, wasn't something that people were taught in business schools at all. And it's good that the stuff is changing now. But that wasn't the case then. So
that is awesome. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just to finish that off. I think it was successful for the following reasons. We had a team that was completely sectioned off and allowed to completely perform as they needed to without any impact from any other system, environment, external source of stress or information. So we completely gave them their own little bubble almost to perform within. And we took that environmental factor and said, what do we need to give this team in order for it to succeed? Mm-hmm. And then on the other side, we showed to the executive layer who had this very low trust, and low trust was coming from the product side of the organization. We needed to show a series of really quick, comprehensive wins that showed we were listening to what they were saying. We felt the pain that they were feeling in describing what their pain points were, and that we were seeking to solve their problems in like a fast, easy to use way. And so everything that we had was in line with this team vision of passionately wanting to solve our customers' problems and to really deeply go to the heart of what they were, so that we could really empathize with them and come up with something awesome that would delight them. And I think this element of customer delight is something that really successful organizations have grasped onto. Like the big product organizations, they have delightful products who want to use their things because they focus on that aspect. I think it's really important. So we did this big turnaround, and we went with these small quick wins from having a product person who was incredibly disengaged to being our largest, biggest champion, which was incredible. And it wasn't because I'd asked her to, it wasn't because somebody from the team, she did this organically by herself, because she could see the effort, she could see the passion that the team was putting in, because they were allowed to thrive. And I've seen this kind of thrive element replicated many times in different circumstances too, but they've all had a very similar starting point, which is correct level of executive buy-in, the right level of support and education at all phases of the transformation, in order to allow the team to fail, understand the failure, learn from it, and get stronger and better in the future. And they've all been kind of sectioned off and allowed to kind of write their own rule book to a certain extent. Their own code of ethics. If you needed code standards, they could define their code standards. They could pick the best standard they want. They could pick their build systems. They could, like, we gave them the power, we gave them the technology, we gave them the sort of safety and security to really experiment and be able to be fast. And there was a ramp up time. So initially it sucked. that's I think one thing that cannot be misstated for any transformation. It will suck initially. As you start going through this change curve where people go from being unconsciously incompetent to consciously competent in what they're doing, to really understanding the new way of thinking, to taking off and flying with it, there is that productivity drop. And this is the point where the people start getting scared and start pushing the panic button. But it's at that point exactly, you almost need to go in the opposite direction and maintain the level of calmness, help, responsiveness, support, championing, education, giving them everything that they need to work through this. And after that point, they start flying. It's impressive.
Wow, that's interesting. Very, very good. Very, very good story around, especially, today we have a more product engineering team work together than ever before. And then having that the story of how initially they're not engaged, they're more of a functional handoff versus a collaborative focus, both on the tech side and also product side on the customer experience. It's definitely aligned on goals as part of the process. Now, with that story, I actually have two follow-up questions. They kind of brought on a little bit of the OKR we talked about earlier. So, with all these terms, there's a transformation, there's the OKR, there's the Agile, and how do you see these things evolved over the years in companies and teams adopting them?
Well, I think the most fascinating thing is that initially there was goal setting. So there was kind of company objectives and there was goal setting for definitely the first part of my Agile career. It was, people did want to try and achieve goals. They wanted to have some kind of way to show that the company was pulling in the right direction. Excuse me. And I think what has been really fascinating is how much in the past 5 to 6 years, OKRs have started really helping solidify what it is that teams need to achieve the company side of the strategy. Because I mean, this is the thing, is like agile in its very forms, you can use it for business to understand value, there's methods that are more focused around product prioritization, there's methods that are development focused as opposed. So the thing that is really important to consider here is that while Agile is more a delivery mechanism, like how do you do good strategic delivery, an OKR is a strategic framework that goes across the top of this. So it's almost like the difference between a KPI and an OKR, for example. Like an OKR would sit over the top, and you'd have key performance indicators within your business areas that fit within that, but it's not a replacement for, because a KPI is not going to necessarily tell you what the goal is.
Right.
And I think that's been a really interesting thing that I've found, is that more companies are willing to embrace this way of planning the goals and giving, again, what does the success look like? And I think that this is the biggest part. We touched when we were having one of our initial conversations about how do you track the success of an agile transformation. OKRs is a really, really good method for this, because it's about looking at other factors that's not just conversion rate, or not just a bug count, not how much clean code you have, not what your code cover is. Like these are vanity metrics that aren't going to tell you really how you're achieving your company goals. But an OKR will be like a North Star that a team can use to then define and divide and conquer the problems that they have in front of them, to help improve the product, to help get happier customers, to have happier teams, change environments, things like this. I remember we had a note on the side here about remembering to mention the half-assed Agile manifesto at some stage.
Right.
One of the things that I think is really important to understand when you're looking at perhaps let's frame it like this. You're using OKRs, you have a company vision, and you've got a company mission, and you're using your OKRs to try and help achieve some of these missions. So we'll define some objectives or some strategies that we want to achieve. Here are the indicators for success. Now we've set those at an organizational level. We've got to look at how we're going to do our delivery for this. Well, perhaps part of the achievement of these goals is looking at how we redesign how our software is defined and how it's delivered, how it's produced. And this is where the Agile part comes in. When it filters down as far as the team transformational activities, and if I say team, I'm thinking like kind of whole product team here, maybe a head of a product area, the teams that are within the different verticals within this product area, up to the chief product officer, chief technology officer as well, who's the sparring partner at the C-level. Because there is a balance here of what a product needs in order to be enhanced, in order to be have the right sort of feature set there that will be useful to the people that are using it. And there's also the balancing act between the technology itself. So if we're looking at like new companies, this factor is kind of low. We don't really need to think about this. A lot of them are already working in a really quite healthy agile fashion. And so you can easily heavily weight the goals more on what the product needs to achieve. But if you're looking at a scale-up organization, and there's a few of them out there, or an older organization that's moved from being a scale-up into an enterprise, you've probably got a lot of technical debt. And technical debt is coming in multiple factors. It could be how the customers can now interact to report instabilities or unhappiness with the system. It's the system itself, what are the performance times? How fast are you getting page loads? What kind of technologies you're using to support the build of the software underneath? Maybe they're old, maybe they're not supported anymore. What's the feature of the system? Are you wanting to move to microservices? Have you got an enormous big sticky monolith because you haven't looked at the architectural impact in the technology, and now you're trying to scale up your feature development, your deployment times, your everything else, and you've got a big ball of mud. So you've got all of these things that you need to balance. And if you add a transformation in on top of this, you've now got a third facet that you need to balance in terms of capacity time for the team, because learning takes time. Understanding problems differently takes time. Conversations takes time. And then you've got product features taking time. And then you've got technology that needs to be improved taking time too. So using OKRs to focus in on those kind of 5 different areas is super important to build transparency and alignment over what teams can really achieve and what they need to achieve. Because you've got to trade those things off. It's a trade-off.
It is a very, 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 very good point. That's exactly what we talk about a portfolio, right? We talk about a responsive portfolio, exactly what the challenges we have. Companies don't just have portfolio for product areas that people normally think about it, right? you do have these competing objectives. They're all important at different time, at different level of degrees of importance. So like you said, at executive level, you identify these goals or pillars, and then you help to decide how much we are going to allocate. Because if you don't give your team resources, then they won't be successful. And those are such incredible observation that, you know, when you said, that's exactly what we experienced as well. And that's how we kind of build this responsive portfolio concept, where the different OKRs form a portfolio of goals that we allocate and prioritize it towards a different set of the goals, so the team can have the resources and alignment to deliver to competing, you know, but are needed objectives. It's just business. It's just the reality of our world, that we don't just have one goal. We just 100% in, right? We do have to say, between tech debt and new feature development and existing customers and the future customers, these competing goals need to be aligned at the executive level.
Yes.
So the teams are not churned to, you know, 15 people come to them, ask them to do, you know, 100 things that you just don't have a weight. You can't prioritize like that.
And I think that this is something I'm just going into my note, because I really want to pull up this one set of data here. And I think this is so critical to understand about how, what are the blockers for success when adopting and scaling organizations? Because the adopting and scaling Agile and adopting and scaling, you know, like adapting and scaling, an organization have very similar things which they run into problems for. And I want to call on the 2019 State of Agile survey. So this is 10,000 customers worldwide in all industries, most of them software. Let's say there's a good kind of 72% of them are software development related. But I mean, this is, I think this is appropriate and applicable to all kinds of change across an organization. So, you know, what are the biggest obstacles that companies face when adopting any kind of digital transformation strategy? General organizational resistance to change. So this is what happens when you don't have a vision and the skills and the resources and the allocation, but nobody knows where anyone's going. So you get this kind of blocking resistance to change. And then the next biggest thing, so that metric was like 48% of the respondents said that this was a really, really big thing for them. Probably the most important thing for them was the fact that the company just generally didn't want to change.
Right.
The next one here, and this one, and I can't yell about enough, not enough leadership participation. And I think that this is one of the biggest blockers to success in any kind of strategy at all, is backseat leadership, or the sort of leadership which doesn't allow for the environmental factors we touched on previously to come forth. So having kind of people who don't just talk the talk, they walk the walk. They are designing OKRs for themselves. So they say, well, here's my OKRs that I have for my own performance. Right. And this is what I'm doing. So they really, they live the stuff they want other people to adopt as well. They become exactly the sort of change that they want to see. And I think this kind of transformation, because somebody read a Gartner report and got told to value this of doing things, is also a huge blocker into the success. The one other part that I wanted to really briefly touch on was, you mentioned before, alignment, transparency, and focus. Like the kind of the three main things that we look at inside an OKR. If it's a good quality OKR, then it should provide transparency, so you know what's happening. You've got alignment at all levels, so that you work with others towards the common goal. And you've got focus, which is working on what is most important. And I think that if every team took those three things into consideration, it's like you have a company OKR that says we want to reduce our deployment times from X to Y. We want to speed up deployment as a technological goal. Then it would allow for all of the teams and all of the parts of the organization underneath to look at what could be a single goal for themselves, a single OKR, that would allow them to help that wider problem.
Right.
This focus and this alignment is one of the things that when you do an OKR adoption successfully, and you think about your transformation in terms of getting people to know what's happening, getting them to focus on what the next most important thing is at the time, and getting everybody aligning and pulling in the right direction, it means that you are creating a better environment for success, because people have better quality information. They know who they know what it is that they're supposed to be doing, and anything that falls outside of that is worth questioning. And then everybody else really understands what's going on as well. So I think that that's a nice linkage between those two worlds. And Agile already has transparency built into it too. So there's a nice connection there between the way that we would look at measuring the success of the goal and the mechanism that we would use in order to deliver that. Like having much alignment between those two things as possible, I think, is really helpful too.
Yeah, it's very interesting. The survey you shared is fairly new as well. And it's interesting how the changes are coming from the team level. And they're pushing for changes at the executive level. It's very interesting, this data share with us, right? The teams actually want to make transformation. Now, probably there are lots of theories on, on why the leaders are not want to kick off the change and so on and so forth. I do have a question from the chat on tracking success. And I think that could be related, right? The question is, that when you adopt change, you can see initially there's a dip, and it's a counterintuitive until you think about it. It's true. Probably when you do the first something right for the first time, you're gonna have to learn how to do it right. Yeah. But how long do you see this one would take to go to the starting get up, so that people will say, okay, it's not just a temporary dip. It's not like we go like a bad. We took a wrong path. That we're actually going to trend better. What is the amount of time people should think about and prepare for it?
Okay, well, if I can translate this loosely to how I talk about team adoption. So if I'm in the position where I have to, my role would be to help an organization with a pilot team. So set it up completely greenfields. They don't know what to expect. They've never done this before. I'm maybe, I don't know, pessimistic or realistic with this, but I tend to urge towards pessimism initially, because I think there's too much that's said about all of the wonderful things that you get from a successful agile transformation, and nothing about really how bloody hard it is to achieve. Right. And that I usually say it will take 6 sprints before anything to even make sense. Right. So budget like 1.5, 2 months maybe. To really understand how the different ceremonies fit together, to understand how the new way of thinking about complexity fits together, to understand why we don't all the time want to be talking about ideal hours when we're estimating things. How do we, it is such a paradigm shift of weirdness to start thinking in terms of what the outcome you want to achieve is, rather than how much time it's going to take you to do a thing that may or may not work. And that this is usually 6 weeks. Right. Any experiment that you want to change, or anything that you've got to do within those 6 weeks period, has to run for 6 weeks before you make any kind of changes to it, because you have enough time to go through the forming, storming, norming, performing model. I mean, it's effectively Drucker's model of team performance, right? Right. And I think that it will take probably 6 months to a team to get to operant. And from operancy onwards is when you start seeing the mastery come on. So as long as you give the correct environment, you give them what they need in terms of support. So if they need education, do they need a coach? Do they need different roles? Do they need, what else do they need? Do they need specialized training and new kinds of stuff? Do they need a new tech stack? Are their computers sucky? What else can we think of to help them get successful in this? Right. Provided you create that environment, from 6 months to a year is when you start seeing the real benefits. And from that point forward, interestingly enough, this is when I usually walk away. Nice. The job is done.
So I just, we have a couple minutes left. There's one last question, and I will just paraphrase it. You know, obviously with this pandemic, that it's accelerating the transformation and probably expanding to companies and not even think about it, right? So the remote work and so on and so forth. So what would be some advice on how do you collaborate and keep your team aligned when they are all over the place and you don't have as much FaceTime and so forth?
Okay, well, if I was looking at the necessity to plan a digital transformation online, I would be looking really heavily into interactivity in the collaboration tools. So death by PowerPoint is one way of doing things. It's just not the most effective way of doing things. Using systems which have collaboration methods built into them. They let you all be in the same space, work on the same work at the same time. So things like the very starts of the Google Docs suite, these sorts of things will allow for better collaboration and better planning. But where it gets really cool is where you have framework planning device, kind of like framework planning services. So you could design an entire workshop within it. It has the ability to track an activity stream. You can track people's conversations in chat. You can drop stickies into an area and you can output all of that information. The more points of interactivity you design these planning exercises with and you use them consistently and ongoingly, the more engaging it is to do your work. And I think that there needs to be a real consideration of the human factor of what's going into this. I know from my own experience and being in the middle of trying to measure and start planning out large transformation activities within this past 6-month period, the toll that it's taken on me to try and lock in and focus while the world is collapsing and exploding outside.
Right.
You've got kids who are completely isolated from their friend groups. They don't understand why their birthday party's been cancelled, because how do you explain a virus to a 5-year-old? The emotional impact of this can really not be negated. And I think that the only thing to consider here is that there needs to be a real emphasis on gentleness and not trying to cram an entire work day of work at 100% laser focus. It's not realistic to consider that anymore. You have to reduce your expectations and delivery. So you won't be able to achieve absolutely everything. You might only be able to achieve that much. Take joy in that much,
Right.
and build recognition and appreciation for the fact that people have gotten that far, given everything else.
Right. Right. I think that definitely understanding the challenges from the pandemic, and then by providing better collaboration and a better tooling, that you can make people more efficient. So even though their physical absolute hours reduced, they can be more productive. Imagine the amount of time you spend on PowerPoint. You said managed by PowerPoint, right? The amount of time, I think there was a research on the amount of time you spend on PowerPoint, that only 20% of the time or less are about to convey information. The 80% or more time spent on the formatting and the designing, which is completely unnecessary if you just want to share information in a digestible way. So with that said, I want to also just kind of wrap it up in that, you know, the question, the challenges that we talk about the whole session, as well as your experience, is that there are teams and there are leaders. There's a strategy, there's execution, there are different goals, there are different activities. And these are two words, right?
Sure.
But they have to work together. And there's nothing, like you said, you know, most the challenging part, if the backseat leader don't collaborate, there's no desire to change. And the way to drive them to institute change really is to provide the transparency, not at the individual team only, right? It has to be up and down the chain across the organization. And that's really one of the driving force that, you know, we started Dragon Boat. Because, and that's also the reason I think we talk a lot about like why we need to bring into the organization looking for transformation, because that's the only way you can see your objective, you can see your OKRs, you can tie your strategies, and then you put your Agile execution as a part of it, plug in your team use, right? So even though those two words are still separate, when you come to strategy and execution, at the most part, it's plugged in. You can see what's happening individually. You can see things across the board, the collaboration, the alignment, the transparency, the trust, and the less work.
And I think the progress is the thing that is the final little key there, when you can see it's like, here's the goal, here's what we said we're going to do, and we're 99% done on it because we planned it in this way, and we've experiment, we've radiated it outwards, and that creates trust.
Right, trust.
Trust is
transparency.
The thing.
Yes.
More.
That's awesome.
Oh.
All right. So exciting. Thank you so much for the talk today. We cover a lot of ground. It's very, very helpful. And for those of you who are joining us, thank you for joining us. And we are going to put a summary takeaway on this chat. And if you have any questions, anything we didn't talk about, you want to hear more, would love to hear from you. So
I would just also like to say, Becky, thank you so much for the opportunity. I mean, I love the fact that we've managed to come together and have such again, a fabulous conversation about things that we're so passionate about. And I also, like I said before, I'm adding lists of collaboration tools. I'm adding lists of kind of things to look at on our document. I'm happy to, anybody can hit me up on LinkedIn at any point in time. You can find me there. I'm happy to answer questions. So yeah, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for everyone that's joined in.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Amber. It was a very, very exciting and insightful talk. Thank you. And everyone have a great rest of your day or evening, and happy Thanksgiving if you're celebrating.
Thank you, Becky.
Thank you.
Amber.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Have a great
Enjoy your Thanksgiving, guys.
Thank you.
Giving to our American friends.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. We did it. I'm going to pause.